In 2024, Kody Brown sat in front of TLC cameras and told the world he was a devoted father. That same year, one of his sons died alone in his home and was found by his little brother. Kody Brown was not there. He was not the one who got the call first. He was not the one who rushed through the door. And in the days that followed, as a family shattered in ways no reality TV editing could clean up, one question kept surfacing. Not just in living rooms, not just in Reddit threads, but in the minds of anyone who had ever watched this man claim that his children were his greatest legacy. Where was he? Not just on that day, but in all the days that came before it. A brand is not a life. A brand is a performance of a life. That distinction is the entire foundation of what follows. Before a single detail of this story makes full sense, that line has to land. Because Kody Brown did not simply fail as a father in one dramatic, definable moment. He failed across a decade and a half of small, quiet, consistent choices, and the reason those choices went largely unchallenged for so long is that a television show turned them into content, and content, by its nature, is shaped to be watched rather than examined. Kody Brown spent 14 seasons building one of the most recognizable personal brands in reality television history. The big hair, the turquoise jewelry, the arm around whichever wife happened to be standing closest to the camera. He sold America a specific vision, a loud, chaotic, deeply committed plural family held together by what he called celestial principles and a love bigger than conventional marriage could contain. Season after season, he delivered lines that sounded like conviction. My children are my legacy. Family is the whole point. He said these things with a kind of practiced sincerity that reality television rewards. And TLC rewarded it. Ratings rewarded it. For years, a significant portion of the American viewing public accepted it, or at the very least, kept watching, which in the world of cable reality programming amounts to the same thing. But here is what is critical to understand before going any further. What viewers saw on screen was Kody Brown playing the role of patriarch. What the people inside that family actually experienced was something considerably more complicated, and for some of his children, something far more painful than any audience watching from their couch could have understood at the time. The performance was polished. The reality it was built on was not. For the first several seasons, the production held together, awkwardly at times, with visible tension that the show hinted at but never fully exposed. But it held. By season 17, the cracks were no longer cracked. They were craters. Wife after wife was leaving, not with explosive confrontations designed for season finales, but in the measured, deliberate way that people exit when they have finally accepted that the relationship they were hoping for is never going to arrive. Christine left. Janelle separated. Mary acknowledged years of emotional distance. Adult children who had grown up on camera were quietly disappearing from the narrative, not dramatically, but in the way people disappear when they stop expecting anything different. One by one, Kody Brown's family walked away from him, and one by one, Kody Brown found ways to explain it. Rebellion, spiritual weakness, the influence of outside forces, the failure of others to meet the standard he had set. The explanations were consistent in one particular way. Not once did any of them include a serious reckoning with his own choice. Not once did a confessional camera capture a man genuinely asking himself what role he had played in the collapse of the family he spent 14 seasons telling America was everything to him. That is the pattern that mattered. That is the thread that runs through every section of this story without exception. Because what happened to Garrison Brown, and what happened to Gabriel and Leon, and the rest of the children who grew up inside this family, did not emerge from a single failure or a single moment of poor judgment. It emerged from a pattern. A long, documented, camera-recorded pattern of a man who, when faced with a choice between his own comfort and the difficult work of genuine presence, chose comfort. And then constructed a narrative in which that choice was not a failure but a principled response to circumstances beyond his control. Kody Brown was not a finished person when Sister Wives began. His beliefs about himself had never been seriously tested. Instead of being tested, they were broadcast. And for 14 seasons, the broadcast protected him from the reckoning that the people inside his family were living with every single day. The show did not cause the damage, but it gave the damage somewhere to hide. And while it was hiding, it accumulated accumulated quietly, consistently, year after year, until the weight of it became impossible to carry and the people carrying it began, one by one, to put it down and walk away. Garrison Brown was 25 years old when he died on March 4th, 2024. He was the third child of Kody Brown and his second wife, Janelle. If you watch Sister Wives with any regularity, you probably remember Garrison as one of the louder, more expressive of the Brown children, quick with a joke, clearly bright, someone who wore his personality openly in a way that made him easy to root for. But the version of Garrison Brown that a television show constructed across multiple seasons is not the complete picture. So before this story goes any further into the pattern of choices that surrounded his life, it is worth taking the time to understand who he actually was, not as a character in a reality television narrative, but as a person. Garrison had served in the Army National Guard and reached the rank of Staff Sergeant. That is not a small achievement. That rank requires discipline. It requires commitment. It requires a young man who, whatever chaos existed in his home life, had found a way to build something real inside himself. A structure, a standard, a capacity for showing up consistently under pressure. That is who Garrison Brown was before he was a storyline. He was someone who had looked at the demands of military service and met them. The same young man that his father would later label as rebellious for pushing back against COVID protocols had already demonstrated in a context with genuine stakes that he was capable of exactly the kind of commitment his father claimed to value. After his service, Garrison launched a small business called Bob's Floral, selling Hawaiian shirts online. He was creative. He was entrepreneurial. He approached the project with the same energy he brought to everything, with personality, with humor, with a genuine investment in building something that was his own. The business was not a corporate venture. It was a young man carving out a space in the world that reflected who he was. And who he was, by every account from the people who loved him, was funny. Not reality TV funny, not the performed, camera-aware kind of humor that gets coached out of people after enough seasons in front of a production crew. Garrison was genuinely funny. The kind of funny that comes from intelligence and timing and a real engagement with the people around you. The kind of person who could light up a room without trying. He was also struggling, and the people closest to him knew it. Janelle Brown has spoken publicly about the fact that she and Garrison were in regular contact in the period leading up to his death. She described herself as someone who always picked up the phone, who always texted back, who made herself available because she understood that sometimes a person, even a grown person, even a 25-year-old veteran with his own business and his own humor and his own hard-built sense of self, just needs to know that someone is there. Janelle made that choice actively. She made it consistently. She made it every single day. Now consider what that picture looked like from Garrison's perspective. You are a young man who is going through something hard. You have a mother who texts you, picks up on the first ring, and has made it structurally clear through years of consistent behavior that she is available. And you have a father who, during the COVID years, implemented a set of household rules so rigid that children from Janelle's household, your household, were effectively restricted from moving freely between homes. A father who looked at your pushback against those rules and called it rebellion. A father who in that moment and in the many moments before and after it was in every way that actually mattered somewhere else. That contrast is not a small detail. It is the architecture of Garrison Brown's daily experience as a young man trying to find stable ground. The presence of one parent who showed up completely and the absence of another who explained that absence in the language of principle and spiritual priority shapes a person in ways that do not resolve simply because they reach adulthood. A 25-year-old who grew up inside that specific dynamic, consistently present mother, consistently unavailable father, does not arrive at 25 having neatly processed and filed away the weight of that experience. They carry it, sometimes visibly, sometimes quietly, sometimes in ways that the people paying attention can see and the people who are not paying attention never notice at all. Janelle was paying attention. She made that her daily practice. She picked up the phone, she sent the text, she made sure that Garrison knew through repeated and reliable action rather than television declarations that she was there. Garrison Brown deserved that from both of his parents. He received it from one. The COVID storyline on Sister Wives is not a minor subplot. It is not background noise in a larger narrative about plural marriage and family dysfunction. It is a direct, documented, camera-recorded window into how Kody Brown operated when the pressure was real, when the circumstances demanded that he make choices, and when those choices revealed, with unusual clarity, exactly where his priorities actually lived. The rules he established during the pandemic, quickly dubbed Kody's COVID protocols by fans, created a two-tier family system inside an already complicated plural household. Robin's household, where Kody spent the majority of his time, operated under one set of conditions. The households of Christine, Janelle, and Mary operated under another. Children from those households were not able to move freely between homes. Visits were restricted. Physical closeness was policed. The practical effect of these rules was that Kody Brown built a wall inside his own family and then positioned himself on one side of it. Garrison and his brother Gabriel pushed back. They were young men with their own lives, their own social circles, and their own capacity to evaluate what made sense and what did not. They looked at the rules and disagreed with them. They said so. And when they said so, Kody Brown did not sit down with them and have a real conversation. He did not attempt to understand where they were coming from. He did not ask what they needed or what they were feeling or what it was like to be a young man watching his father construct an elaborate system that kept him at a distance. He labeled them. He called their pushback rebellion. He treated their dissent as evidence of a character flaw rather than as sons trying to connect with a father who kept moving the goalposts. What the cameras captured and what the editors, to their credit, did not fully sanitize was two young men essentially begging for their father's engagement and receiving instead his judgment. Garrison in particular came across in those scenes not as a rebel, but as someone who desperately wanted to matter to his father and had run out of conventional ways to make that happen. Conflict was the only channel still open, and so he used it. Even a fight is a form of contact. Even anger is a form of attention. For a young man whose father had been emotionally unavailable for years, negative attention was better than the alternative, which was nothing at all. This is not a new story in the world of family psychology. Therapists have written about this dynamic for decades. When a parent is consistently unavailable, not abusive, not visibly cruel, but simply absent in the ways that matter, children will often escalate behavior as a way of generating connection. They are not trying to cause problems. They are trying to be seen. Garrison Brown was trying to be seen, and Kody Brown, with every dismissive label he applied to his son's behavior, was communicating without using the words that his son was not worth the effort of genuine engagement. That is the context that has to be held in full when examining what Kody Brown said after Garrison died. Because he did say something. He appeared on camera, as he always does, and he described digging his son's grave by hand. He described it as one of the most significant acts of his life. His exact words, "I've never done anything like this, digging a grave. I think this is one of the most important things I've ever done. It's the last ode to my boy." The public reaction was immediate and it was sharp. And the public reaction was justified. Not because grief has a correct form, not because there is a rule book for how a father is supposed to process the death of a child, but because of the contrast. The specific, unavoidable, documented contrast between what Kody Brown called the most important thing he had ever done for his son and what Kody Brown had actually done and not done across the 25 years that preceded that afternoon. A grave requires one afternoon of physical labor. It cannot talk back, it cannot push back against protocols, it cannot need something from you at an inconvenient time. It cannot send a text that you choose not to return. It cannot sit across from you at a dinner table and reflect back something that challenges the story you are telling about yourself. A grave is permanent, and it is silent, and it requires nothing further. Kody Brown showed up to dig his son's grave. The record, the long, televised, multi-season, publicly documented record, shows that he did not show up for the 25 years that came before it. Not consistently, not in the daily, unglamorous, unremarkable ways that determine whether a child grows up knowing in his bones that his father is present, or whether he grows up waiting for a version of his father that never quite arrives. The grave statement is not important because it proves Kody Brown did not love his son. Grief is real. Pain is real. A father losing a child is one of the most devastating experiences a human being can face, regardless of the history that preceded it. The statement is important because of what it reveals about the lens through which Kody Brown has always processed his role as a father. The grand gesture, the visible act, the single afternoon that generates a lifetime of narrative credit. Kody Brown has always understood fatherhood as something performed in moments. The confessional declaration, the spiritual speech, the physical labor of a single difficult day. What he has never demonstrated, not consistently, not reliably, across 14 seasons of documented family life, is an understanding of fatherhood as something built in the spaces between the moments, in the texts returned, in the calls made without an audience, in the daily, invisible, unfilmable act of simply being available to another person who needs you. That is what Garrison Brown needed. That is what the record shows he did not reliably receive. And that gap between what a father performed for cameras and what a son experienced in the quiet of an ordinary day is the real story that Sister Wives spent 18 seasons circling without ever fully saying out loud. After Garrison's funeral, Leon, Kody Brown's child with first wife Mary, who uses they/them pronouns, posted something publicly that stopped a significant number of people cold. The post was not long. It was not a carefully constructed emotional essay. It did not build toward a dramatic conclusion or ask for sympathy or attempt to explain the full complexity of a fractured family relationship. It was short, precise, and final. It read, "Kody blatantly blew me off at Garrison's funeral. He is a liar. He is a joke of a father. That's all." Leon also noted that as of the time of that post, they had not heard from Kody at all since Garrison's death in March 2024. Read that combination of facts carefully. At the funeral of his own son, in the room, on the day, surrounded by a family gathered in the most devastating moment of their collective lives, Kody Brown could not find a way to be present for another one of his children. Not before the tragedy. Not in some distant historical context open to interpretation. At the funeral. While the family was still in the acute, raw, unprocessed shock of loss. And then, in the months that followed, silence. No call. No text, nothing. Leon had not heard from their father since the death of their brother. That phrase, "that's all," is the detail that does not leave you. It is not the language of someone in the middle of an emotional confrontation. It is not the language of someone who still has enough energy invested to be angry in the productive sense. It is the language of a person who has reached the absolute end of their capacity to hope for something different. That's all is the sound of a door closing quietly. No slam, no raised voice, no final dramatic statement. Just the soft, definitive click of someone who is completely done. Leon was not performing that post for an audience. There is no version of those words that is reaching for attention or effect. That post is a person stating a fact about their father and then ending the sentence because there is nothing left to add. And Leon is not alone. The picture that has emerged from the Brown children, not from tabloids, not from rumor, but from their own social media, their own public statements, their own documented choices about who they spend time with and who they do not, is a picture of a generation of young people who have, in large numbers, quietly moved on from their father. Not all of them have spoken publicly about it. Not all of them need to. The pattern is visible to anyone paying attention. Gabriel found Garrison. That fact deserves more than a single line in a broader narrative. Gabriel, Janelle's son, one of the boys Kody labeled rebellious during the COVID protocol disputes, one of the young men who pushed back and received judgment in return, walked through that door. He was the one who encountered what was on the other side of it. He was the one who had to hold that information in his body while making the calls, while the rest of the family was still moving through the ordinary minutes of an ordinary morning that was about to change permanently for all of them. No younger sibling should ever have to carry that. The discovery itself, the specific, visceral, irreversible weight of what Gabriel experienced in that moment is the kind of thing that does not get processed quickly or cleanly. It stays. It reshapes the interior landscape of a person in ways that take years to understand and longer to navigate. And Gabriel has had to carry that largely without his father. Because Kody Brown, in the months following the death of one son, was not showing up for the living son who needed him most urgently. He was not calling, he was not texting, he was not doing, by any account any family member has offered publicly, the basic and necessary work of being present for a child in crisis. That absence is not ambiguous. It is not subject to interpretation or editorial framing. It is documented in the silence, in Leon's post, in the accounts of family members, in the gap between what Kody Brown said about his family on camera and what his family has described experiencing off it. Season 19 of Sister Wives, which aired in the period following Garrison's death, was described by a large number of longtime viewers as heavily edited, emotionally flat in a way that did not match the scale or the rawness of what this family had just been through. Conversations that should have been present were not. Reactions that seemed too composed for the circumstances. Moments where the emotional reality of an unimaginable loss felt managed and controlled in a way that sat wrong with people who had watched this family for years and understood the difference between narrative shaping and outright sanitization. Networks make editorial decisions. That is standard and expected practice. Legal liability, contractual obligations, sensitivity concerns, these are all legitimate reasons for a production to pull back in the aftermath of a family tragedy. None of that is unusual. What was unusual, and what viewers noticed at scale across multiple platforms, was the size of the gap between what was shown and what felt missing. That gap was large enough and consistent enough across enough independent observations that it cannot be responsibly dismissed as audience projection. There are theories, and they deserve to be named clearly as theories, that conversations captured on camera in the period before Garrison's death did not make it to air. Conversations that may have included visible warning signs. Conversations that, if they existed and if they had been broadcast, might have fundamentally altered the shape of the story TLC was constructing about this family. These cannot be confirmed. But the gap between what viewers were shown and what viewers felt was missing was large enough that naming it is not speculation, it is observation. What is not a theory, and what is fully on the record, is this. Janelle Brown was texting her son the day before he died. She has described herself as someone who always picked up the phone, who always made herself available, who understood that presence is not a gesture reserved for emergencies, but a daily practice maintained through ordinary moments. Garrison was struggling. The people who were paying attention knew it. And Kody Brown, in the weeks and months following his son's death, was not calling his children, was not texting Leon back, was not, by any account given publicly by any family member, doing the hard and necessary and deeply unglamorous work of showing up for the people still living who needed their father. Instead, he was giving interviews. He was appearing on camera. He was talking about digging a grave and calling it the most important thing he had ever done. The camera was there. The camera was always there. And the camera, as it had for 18 seasons, was doing what it has always done for Kody Brown, giving him a place to tell a story about himself while the people in that story waited, without cameras, for something real. Kody Brown stated on camera that while he is open to reconciliation with his estranged children, he will not prioritize those relationships over his relationship with Robyn. He did not say this privately. He did not say it in a moment of frustration that a production crew happened to capture. He said it deliberately on record in the kind of composed confessional delivery that 14 seasons of television had made second nature to him. He placed his children and his spouse in a hierarchy and announced publicly, without apparent awareness of what that announcement revealed, which one wins. There is an important distinction that gets lost when people debate that statement. The debate usually frames it as a question about marriage versus parenthood, about whether a spouse should come before children, about the mechanics of blended and plural family dynamic. That framing misses the actual weight of what he said. Nobody is arguing that Kody Brown is not allowed to have a primary relationship with his wife. A committed marriage being the central adult relationship in a person's life is not controversial. That is not what his statement described. His statement described something more specific and more damaging. It described a man who would not actively pursue repair with children he had already lost, who would wait for reconciliation to arrive on terms that cost him nothing, rather than doing the work of reaching out to the people who had every reason to stop waiting for him. His children were not asking him to leave Robyn. They were not asking him to return to plural marriage or to rebuild the family structure that had collapsed. As far as the public record shows, through the statements they have made and the silences they have maintained, most of them were asking for something far simpler and far more devastating in its simplicity. They were asking him to call, to text, to acknowledge that they exist outside the story he is telling about himself, to be, in some recognizable and consistent way, their father. And he responded to that ask by going on camera and explaining why meeting it would be inconvenient. Robin did not make that statement. Kody Brown made that statement. And this matters because the Robin conversation, which is a real and legitimate conversation with its own valid dimensions, too often becomes a mechanism for distributing Kody Brown's responsibility across other people. Robin did not implement the COVID protocols. Robin did not label Garrison and Gabriel as rebellious for wanting their father's engagement. Robin did not blow Leon off at a funeral. Robin did not spend months after a son's death failing to contact the children still living. Those were Kody Brown's choices, made by Kody Brown in a pattern that predates and extends far beyond the dynamics of his fourth marriage. Kody Brown was not a finished person when Sister Wives began. His beliefs about himself, his capacity for love, his spiritual destiny, his role as a patriarch worthy of the title had never been seriously tested before the cameras arrived. And instead of being tested, they were amplified. They were turned into a brand and broadcast to millions of people who were, by the nature of the format, positioned to receive that brand rather than examine it. When belief becomes brand, every challenge to that belief feels like an attack on the brand. So it never gets interrogated. It never gets refined by honest contact with the people it was supposed to serve. Every time his children pushed back, it threatened the brand. Every time a wife expressed real dissatisfaction, it threatened the brand. Every time the ordinary, unglamorous messiness of actual family life refused to conform to the celestial vision he was selling, it threatened the brand. And his response, consistently across 18 seasons without meaningful variation, was not to interrogate the vision. It was to protect it. To locate the source of the problem somewhere outside himself and construct a narrative in which his choices were not choices at all, but principled responses to the failures of the people around him. The camera is always there. The camera has always been there. And after 18 seasons, it is genuinely not possible to locate where Kody Brown the person ends and Kody Brown the character begins. 1 year after Garrison's death, his siblings gathered. Several of them got matching tattoos. The quote they chose came from Garrison's favorite film, Dragonheart to the Stars. Bowen, to the start. That line comes from a moment in the film about a knight making a promise to a dying dragon, about honoring someone not in a single grand gesture, but in the ongoing, daily, unglamorous commitment to remembering who they were and what they meant. It is a line about presence, about the kind of love that does not stop when the audience leaves. Garrison Brown's siblings chose that line together. They got those tattoos together. Not because a network was paying, not because a camera was rolling, not because it built a brand or advanced a narrative, because they loved their brother and they had decided, collectively and without fanfare, that they were going to carry him forward. Christine left and rebuilt. She remarried. She is, by every visible measure, living the life she always wanted the plural family to approximate, with a partner who is actually present, with children and grandchildren around her, with the daily evidence that leaving was not a failure, but a correction. Janelle has grieved without performing her grief. She has been clear-eyed and present and deeply connected to her children through one of the most devastating periods any mother can face. She has not performed her grief for cameras. She has lived it. And her children call her. That is her legacy. Not a television show, not a brand, not a declaration delivered to a confessional camera. The fact that her children, even in their worst moments, knew she would pick up, that is what devotion actually looks like when it is real. Those choices were not violent. They were not dramatic. They were quiet. They were the kind of choices that are easy to rationalize in the moment, easy to explain away in a confessional, easy to make sound complicated when they were, at their core, very simple. He chose not to call. He chose not to show up. He chose over and across more than a decade of documented family life, the path that cost him nothing immediately and everything eventually. The long run always arrived. It arrived for Kody Brown while the cameras were still rolling, which is the detail that makes this story different from most. He did not lose his family in private. He lost it on television, season by season, wife by wife, child by child, in full view of an audience that watched it happen and for years accepted the explanations he offered for why it was always someone else's fault. They just left, quietly, the way people leave when the love they needed was never going to arrive in the form they needed it. Most of his children do not speak to him. One of them is not here anymore. And the man who said family was everything is sitting in a house in Flagstaff with one wife and a camera crew telling a story that fewer and fewer people, including his own children, are willing to be part of anymore. That is not a villain's ending. It is something quieter and in many ways more honest than that. It is the ending that belongs to a man who confused being watched with being present, who built a legacy out of performance rather than presence, and who paid a price for that confusion that no amount of camera time, no confessional explanation, and no afternoon of grave digging can undo. Garrison Brown deserved better. Gabriel deserved better. Leon deserved better. All 18 of them did. And the record, the long, unedited, fully documented record of what this family actually lived through, reflects that clearly enough that it does not require embellishment. The story tells itself. It always did. The cameras were just pointed in the wrong direction.